Sarah gripped Michael's hand tightly as they stood in the entryway of their new home, their breath visible in the crisp autumn air. The old Victorian house loomed before them, its turrets and gables casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. "This is it," Michael said, a wide smile spreading across his face. "Our dream home." Sarah couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement in the pit of her stomach. After years of saving and searching, they had finally found the perfect place to start their new life together. She squeezed Michael's hand and gazed up at the imposing structure, its weathered siding and ornate trim giving it an air of timeless elegance. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her eyes drinking in every detail. The house had captured her imagination the moment they had first laid eyes on it, and now that it was theirs, she couldn't wait to make it their own. Michael wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Just wait until you see the inside," he said, guiding her through the creaking front door and into the grand foyer. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the high ceilings, the intricate woodwork, and the sprawling staircase that dominated the space. Sunlight streamed in through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the worn but well-maintained hardwood floors. "It's perfect," she murmured, her fingers tracing the delicate pattern of the wallpaper. Michael chuckled, his hazel eyes twinkling with pride. "I knew you'd love it." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Welcome home, Mrs. Granger." As they began to explore the rest of the house, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. Each room held a new discovery, a hidden alcove, a beautiful fireplace, or a stunning view of the surrounding countryside. It was everything they had ever dreamed of and more. But as they climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor, Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the corners of the hallway appeared to linger a little too long. She shook her head, dismissing the feeling as simply the result of an old house settling. "Are you all right?" Michael asked, his brow furrowing with concern. Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little chilly up here." She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "This place is amazing, Michael. I can't believe it's ours." He grinned, pulling her close. "Me neither. And just think, this is only the beginning." They spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking and settling into their new home, their laughter and chatter filling the empty rooms. Sarah marveled at how quickly it was starting to feel like their own, the familiar scent of their belongings mingling with the old, musty smell of the house. As night fell, Sarah stood by the kitchen window, gazing out at the darkened landscape. The once vibrant colors of the day had given way to muted grays and blues, and a thick fog had crept in from the nearby woods. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Are you cold, love?" Michael asked, coming up behind her and enveloping her in a warm embrace. "A little," Sarah admitted, leaning back into his chest. "It's just this house. It has such a presence, doesn't it?" Michael chuckled softly. "That's part of its charm. An old place like this, it's bound to have a few quirks." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But don't worry, I'll keep you warm." Sarah smiled, turning in his arms to plant a gentle kiss on his lips. "I know you will." She rested her head on his shoulder, gazing out at the misty night. "I can't wait to see what adventures this house has in store for us." Little did she know the house had far more in store than either of them could have imagined. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with a growing sense of unease. Every creak of the floorboards and groan of the old house seemed to echo through the darkness, setting her nerves on edge. She tossed and turned, her eyes constantly drawn to the shadows that seemed to shift and swell in the corners of the room. Finally, Sarah sat up, running a hand through her tousled hair. "Michael?" she whispered, reaching out to shake her husband's shoulder. He stirred, blinking sleepily. "What is it, love?" I can't sleep," she admitted, her voice barely above a murmur. "There's something off about this house. I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone." Michael propped himself up on one elbow, his brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how to articulate the unease that had been building within her. "I don't know," she finally said, her gaze darting to the shadows once more. "It's just, there's something about this place. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it feels haunted." Michael let out a soft chuckle, pulling her close. Haunted, huh? I think you've been reading too many ghost stories, my dear. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. This is an old house, that's all. It's going to make some strange noises, but I promise there's nothing to worry about. Sarah wanted to believe him, to dismiss the growing sense of dread that had taken root in the pit of her stomach. But as she lay back down, her eyes fixed on the swirling shadows, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting in the darkness. The days that followed Sarah and Michael's arrival in their new home were filled with a sense of excitement and possibility. They spent their time unpacking, arranging their belongings, and reveling in the beauty of their Victorian estate. Yet, as the hours ticked by, Sarah found herself increasingly unsettled by the peculiarities of the old house. It began with the little things, the creak of a floorboard that seemed to echo just a moment too long, the faint whispering that would drift through the halls, and the unsettling shadows that seemed to linger in the corners of each room. Sarah would catch glimpses of them out of the corner of her eye, only to have them vanish when she turned her head. "It's just the house settling," Michael would assure her, his warm hand on her shoulder. "Old buildings make strange sounds. There's nothing to worry about." But as the days passed, the disturbances grew more frequent and more unsettling. One evening, as they sat together in the cozy living room, a sudden chill swept through the space, causing Sarah to shiver and wrap her arms around herself. Michael glanced over, brow furrowed in concern. "Are you cold, love?" he asked, reaching to pull a blanket over her. Sarah shook her head, her gaze fixed on the flickering fireplace. "No, it's not that," she murmured. "Didn't you feel it? That coldness?" Michael paused, his hand hovering over the blanket. "I didn't notice anything," he admitted, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure you're all right?" Sarah hesitated, unable to shake the lingering sensation of being watched. I'm not sure," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's just something about this place, Michael. Something that doesn't feel right." Her husband moved closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "Hey, it's okay," he soothed, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "This is our home now, and we're going to make it ours. Whatever strange things you've been feeling, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation." Sarah nodded, leaning into his embrace, but the unease continued to gnaw at her. As the evening wore on, the couple retired to their bedroom, but Sarah found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with unanswered questions. It was in the early hours of the morning that the disturbances escalated. A loud crash from the kitchen jolted Sarah awake, her heart pounding in her chest. She sat up, clutching the sheets, and glanced over at Michael, who was already rising from the bed, his brow furrowed with concern. "What was that?" he murmured, reaching for the baseball bat they had brought with them for self-defense. Sarah trembled, her fingers tightening on the bedspread. I don't know," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the bedroom door. Slowly, Michael eased the door open, bat raised, and cautiously made his way down the dark hallway. Sarah held her breath, her own fear pounding in her ears as she waited for him to return. After what felt like an eternity, Michael reappeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "The kitchen, it's a mess," he said, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Dishes and pots and pans all over the floor. I can't figure out what could have caused it." Sarah's eyes widened, her heart sinking. So it wasn't just me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael shook his head, crossing the room to sit beside her on the bed. "No, it wasn't just you," he admitted, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Something's going on in this house, Sarah, and I don't know what it is." Sarah leaned into him, seeking the comfort of his embrace. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice quivering. "I knew there was something wrong here." They spent the rest of the night sitting together in the bedroom, neither of them daring to venture back into the kitchen. As the first hints of dawn began to peek through the curtains, Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted both physically and emotionally. When she awoke, the events of the previous night felt almost like a dream, if not for the lingering sense of unease that hung in the air. Michael had already risen and was in the kitchen, surveying the damage. As Sarah joined him, her eyes widened at the sight of the once pristine space. Shattered dishes and overturned pots littered the floor, and the cabinets stood open, their contents scattered haphazardly. What could have done this? She breathed, her fingers trembling as she reached out to gently touch a shard of broken ceramic. Michael shook his head, his brow furrowed in concentration. I have no idea, he admitted, crouching down to examine the mess more closely. There's no sign of a break-in and nothing seems to be missing. It's as if the kitchen just exploded. Sarah swallowed hard, her gaze sweeping the room. Do you think it's the house? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael paused, his eyes meeting hers. I don't know, Sarah, he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. But I promise we're going to figure this out. Whatever's going on here, we'll get to the bottom of it. Despite his reassuring words, Sarah couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that had taken root in the pit of her stomach. As they set to work cleaning up the mess, she found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see some unseen force lurking in the shadows. As the day wore on, the couple's unease only deepened. More strange occurrences began to plague the house. Doors slamming on their own, objects moving of their own accord, and a constant feeling of being watched. Sarah found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. Maybe we should look into getting an exorcist or something, she suggested one evening as they huddled together on the couch, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the room. Michael let out a soft chuckle, pulling her close. An exorcist, he teased, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her arm. I think we might be jumping the gun a little, don't you? Sarah shot him a reproachful look, her brow furrowed with worry. Michael, this isn't funny, she insisted, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. Something is wrong here, and I don't know what to do about it. Her husband's expression softened, and he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. All right, he murmured, his arm tightening around her. We'll look into it, I promise. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? There might be a perfectly rational explanation for all of this. Sarah wanted to believe him, to dismiss the growing sense of dread that had taken hold of her. But as the night wore on and the shadows continued to shift and swell, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something dark and malevolent was lurking within the very walls of their new home. The days that followed were a whirlwind of research and investigation for Sarah and Michael. Determined to uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences in their new home, they pored over old newspaper clippings, historical records, and any scrap of information they could find about the house's dark past. Sarah's unease only grew as the disturbing details began to emerge. According to the local archives, their Victorian estate had once belonged to the ill-fated Callahan family, a close-knit clan whose lives had been brutally cut short decades ago. It says here that the Callahans were murdered in their own home, Michael murmured, his brow furrowed as he scanned the yellowed newspaper article. The entire family slaughtered in a single night. Sarah shuddered, hugging herself as a chill swept through the room. And we're living in the same house where it happened, she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael nodded, his expression grim. It seems that way. He reached out, taking her hand in his. But Sarah, we don't know for sure that it's connected to what's been happening here. This house has been through a lot, but that doesn't mean we're in any danger. She wanted to believe him, to dismiss the growing sense of dread that had taken hold of her. But as they delved deeper into the Callahans' tragic story, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were uncovering something far more sinister than a simple act of violence. The police reports painted a chilling picture. The Callahans had been subjected to a brutal and merciless attack, their bodies mutilated and their home left in utter ruin. What was even more disturbing, however, was the evidence that pointed to a supernatural element in the killings. Witnesses described hearing unearthly howls and seeing strange shadowy figures moving through the house, Michael read, his voice tinged with a growing unease. The crime scene was littered with occult symbols and signs of a ritual killing. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. You don't think there's some kind of demon or evil spirit in this house, do you? She asked, her fingers tightening around his hand. Michael hesitated, his expression grave. I don't know, Sarah, he admitted, pulling her close. But whatever happened here, it was something unspeakably dark and twisted. And it seems that the entity responsible has lingered. The couple pored over the records, their hearts pounding with each new revelation. The Callahan House had become infamous in the years following the murders, with countless reports of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings. Families had moved in and moved out, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere and the sense of being watched. And now it seemed they were the latest victims of the house's sinister history. As the truth began to sink in, Sarah found herself consumed by a growing sense of dread and fear. The idea that a malevolent supernatural force had taken up residence in their new home, one that had claimed the lives of an entire family, was almost too much to bear. "We need to get out of here, Michael," she pleaded, her eyes wild with panic. "This place, it's cursed. We have to leave before it's too late." But her husband remained steadfast, his expression resolute. "No, Sarah," he said firmly, gripping her shoulders. "We're not going anywhere. This is our home now, and we're going to fight for it." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Fight?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can we possibly fight against something that killed an entire family?" Michael's gaze hardened, his jaw set with determination. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have to try. We can't just run away and let this evil entity win. We have to confront it, Sarah, and put an end to its reign of terror once and for all." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Sarah felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. She knew that Michael was right. They couldn't simply abandon their home and their dreams, not when something so malevolent lurked within its walls. But the thought of facing off against a supernatural force that had claimed so many lives before them was enough to make her blood run cold. As the days wore on, Sarah and Michael poured all of their energy into researching the history of the Callahan House and the dark entity that had plagued it. They scoured occult texts and consulted with local experts, desperate to find a way to rid their home of the malevolent presence. The more they uncovered, the more they realized the true extent of the entity's power and the centuries-old evil that it embodied. This was no ordinary ghost or poltergeist. It was an ancient demonic force that had fed on the fear and despair of its victims for generations. "It's a demon, Sarah," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A malevolent spirit that has been drawn to this house, drawn to the pain and suffering that has taken place here. And it's still here waiting for us." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat, her hands trembling as she gripped the tattered pages of the old journal they had uncovered. "Then how do we stop it?" she asked, her voice tinged with a desperate edge. "How do we defeat something so powerful?" Michael's expression was grim, but there was a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have to try. We can't let this thing win. Not after what it's done to the Callahans and who knows how many others." Sarah swallowed hard, nodding slowly. She knew that Michael was right. They couldn't back down, not now. Whatever horrors awaited them, they had to face them head-on, for the sake of their home and their very lives. As the days turned into weeks, the couple's research became more and more frantic, their desperation growing with each new discovery. They pored over ancient texts, consulted with occult experts, and even reached out to a local priest, all in a desperate attempt to find a way to vanquish the demonic entity that had taken root in their home. The tension in the house was palpable, the very air charged with a sense of impending doom. Sarah found herself jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every unexplained shadow that danced across the walls. She could feel the entity's presence, watching and waiting, its malevolent gaze fixed upon them. And then one night, as Sarah and Michael huddled together in their bedroom, the entity made its move. A sudden chill swept through the room, the temperature plummeting as a dense fog seemed to seep in from the shadows. Sarah clutched Michael's arm, her heart pounding in her chest, as a dark, spectral figure began to take shape before them. The demon's eyes glowed with a sickly, otherworldly light, its features twisted and distorted into a horrifying visage. Sarah felt a scream catch in her throat as it reached out towards them, its clawed hands grasping for their very souls. This was it, she realized with a sinking feeling. The final confrontation had begun, and their very lives hung in the balance. As the demonic figure lunged toward them, Michael reacted instinctively, pulling Sarah behind him. He brandished the old journal they had found, hoping that some of the ancient incantations within might have the power to repel the entity. With a shaking voice, he began to read aloud from the pages, his words echoing through the room. "Spirits of light, protect us. By the power of the holy, I command you to leave this place." The demon hissed, its eyes narrowing with fury as it recoiled from the words. But it was not enough. The entity advanced again, its malevolent presence growing stronger with each passing second. "Sarah, the candles!" Michael shouted, his voice strained with desperation. Sarah nodded, scrambling to light the protective circle of candles they had placed around the room. As each flame flickered to life, the air grew warmer, the oppressive darkness retreating slightly. She could feel the power of the light pushing back against the encroaching evil. "Michael, keep going," she urged, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. Michael continued to chant, his voice growing stronger with each word. The demon howled in rage, its form beginning to waver and flicker like a shadow on the verge of dissolution. It clawed at the air, trying to break through the protective barrier that the candles and Michael's incantations had created. With one final desperate push, Sarah joined her voice to Michael's, repeating the words of the incantation with all the strength she could muster. The room was filled with a blinding light, and the demon let out a deafening scream as it was forced back into the shadows from whence it came. For a moment there was silence. Then the oppressive chill lifted, and the room seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The candles flickered gently, their light now a comforting presence rather than a desperate defense. Michael and Sarah collapsed into each other's arms, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and the adrenaline of the confrontation. They had done it. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. "I can't believe it," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It's over. We did it." Michael nodded, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We did, love. We faced our worst fears and came out stronger. This is our home, and nothing will take it from us." In the days that followed, the house felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. Michael and Sarah continued their renovations, transforming the old Victorian estate into a true dream home. The house, once haunted by the shadows of its dark past, now stood as a testament to their courage and determination. They had faced the unknown together and emerged stronger for it, their bond unbreakable. As they sat together on the porch one crisp autumn evening, watching the sun set over the now tidy lawn, Sarah took Michael's hand in hers and smiled. "Welcome home, Mr. Granger," she said softly. Michael squeezed her hand, his hazel eyes twinkling with love and pride. "Welcome home, Mrs. Granger." And in that moment they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their love and determination guiding them through even the darkest of times.